The moment Rachel opened the front door, she knew something was off. It wasn't just the silence, though, that hung heavier than usual in the air of the small Springfield, Missouri house. It was the way her mother Linda stood in the center of the kitchen with a suitcase already packed and zipped her arms at her sides, face unreadable. Her father, Robert, didn't even look up from the kitchen table where he sat nursing a glass of bourbon and watching a muted news segment on the old television perched on the counter. 30 is too old to freeload. It's time to go, he said, his voice flat and fine. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, the air from outside clinging to her coat. The birthday cake box in her hands felt suddenly absurd. She had picked it up after her shift at the retail office, a small thing with vanilla frosting and the words, "Happy 30th." Rachel written hastily in red icing. $20 and a sliver of hope. She blinked, then looked from her mother to her father. "You're serious?" Neither of them responded immediately. Her mother shifted uncomfortably, brushing a piece of lint off her apron, as if it were the most pressing issue in the room. "We talked about this," Linda murmured. "You need to be independent." Independent." Rachel set the cake down on the counter, the box landing with a soft thud. "I pay the electric bill. The internet. I cover half the mortgage, and I paid the property taxes last year when you forgot." Robert chuckled. It was a short, sharp sound that didn't touch his eyes. "Paying a few bills doesn't give you a lifetime pass, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word hit harder than she expected, its edge sharpened by years of condescension and unmet expectations. Rachel stood still for a moment, then slowly took off her coat, hanging it carefully on the hook by the pantry. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind reeled. So this was how it was going to happen, on her 30th birthday no less. She turned to face them again. "You packed my things." Linda glanced at the suitcase. "Just the essentials. You can come back for the rest later." There was no anger in Rachel's voice, no pleading. Only a quiet numbness that was starting to creep through her chest, like frost settling into soil before a hard winter. "Is dinner at least for me?" she asked, nodding toward the table. Her father shrugged. "We made meatloaf. You can have what's left." Rachel walked to the table, sat down, and looked at the plate that had clearly been sitting there for some time. Meatloaf, microwaved, instant mashed potatoes. No candles, no card. She picked up a fork and poked the food without interest. "Happy birthday to me," she said under her breath. No one replied. She stood up, leaving the plate untouched. "I'll go pack the rest." Upstairs, her bedroom was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Neat, organized, as if still hoping to be seen and valued. She closed the door behind her, leaned her back against it, and exhaled. The quiet pressed in from all sides. She moved to her desk and opened her laptop, the screen flickering to life with a soft glow that felt both familiar and alien. She pulled up her bank account. Line after line of transactions, stared back at her utility payments. Grocery runs, car maintenance for her father's aging truck, Amazon orders her mother placed on the Share to Prime account. Hundreds, no thousands of dollars over the years, and never a thank you, never even acknowledgement. Rachel stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the trackpad. She clicked into her utility account, electric, water, internet, all under her name. She had been the backbone of the house. Quietly, efficiently. Now discarded. She hovered over the Cancel Autopay button. Her reflection in the darkened window next to her desk caught her eye. For the first time in a long while, her face didn't look tired. It looked focused. Cold, even. Let them figure it out, she thought. Let them realize who kept the lights on. The cursor blinked on the screen like a metronome, counting down to a decision. She didn't hesitate. Click. The hum of the old desktop was the only sound that filled the room. Outside the small town of Springfield, slept under a cloudless Missouri sky, stars shining above like distant judgment. But inside the Morgan house, in a room once painted soft lavender, Rachel sat motionless in the dim glow of her desk lamp. Her face was pale, focused. Her fingers moved with eerie calm across the keyboard. Cancel autopay, confirm. Cancel gas service, confirm. Cancel cable and Wi-Fi, confirm. One by one, the lifelines of comfort and convenience she had kept running for this house were severed. With each click, she felt something loosen inside her, like a bandage being unwrapped from a wound too long ignored. The spreadsheet on her second screen listed every bill she'd paid over the last 5 years. The sums were staggering thousands for utilities, emergency car repairs, groceries when her father forgot his wallet, mortgage top-ups when her mother cried about late fees. Rachel had never asked for thanks, but now she wasn't asking for forgiveness either. In another tab, she logged into the Joint Emergency Fund, a savings account that Rachel had contributed to monthly, often skipping small joys like new shoes or weekend getaways. So her parents wouldn't feel the pressure, she transferred every dollar into her private account. Then she hit the freeze function. No withdrawals, no access. A soft exhale escaped her lips. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up years ago, burned off by years of silent resentment. What remained now was a cold clarity. She scrolled through old bank statements, flagging anything she might need later. Each highlighted line was another receipt of how deep she'd been invested in a family that had decided she was replaceable. At the bottom of the document, she typed in block letters, "No longer responsible." When the final click echoed softly in the silence, Rachel sat back and stared at the screen. Her eyes were glassy but alert, like someone waking from a long, disorienting dream. At 5:52 a.m., just as dawn began bleeding into the edges of the sky, she shut her laptop. She stood slowly, every muscle stiff, and walked to the window. The Morgans' front lawn, once trimmed by Rachel herself every weekend, looked quiet, peaceful, undeserved. She turned off the light, laid down on the bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. She didn't sleep. She didn't need to. The calls began at 8:07 a.m. First it was Robert, one call. Then another voicemail. "Rach, something's up with the Wi-Fi. Can you fix it?" Then Linda, "Sweetheart, the water's not coming on. Did we miss a payment?" Rachel didn't answer. By 9:15 a.m., the voicemails turned frantic. "Internet's still out and the TV won't turn on," Robert snapped. "Did you forget to pay the damn bill?" At 9:32 a.m., a text from her mother. "Gas isn't working. I tried calling the company, but they said the account's inactive. What is going on?" Rachel read every message without emotion. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, like a nervous animal begging attention. She let it vibrate itself into silence. By noon, the calls had turned from concern to confusion, then to blame, and by evening, the neighbors began to notice. A whisper from across the fence. No lights on over at the Morgans' place. Saw Robert on the porch, yelling at the power company over his cell someone else at. Rachel's cousin Mason messaged her around 5:47 p.m. Uncle Rob is fuming, Aunt Linda's crying in the kitchen. They have no idea what happened. "You okay?" She responded with a thumbs up, that was all. But inside, something began to stir. Not guilt, but preparation. She pulled out a folder from her closet. Thick with printouts, she had always been meticulous. Her receipts were alphabetized, her tax documents filed by year. She began scanning them one by one, saving PDFs with timestamps, uploading to a secure cloud. Rent payments, utility transfers, statements from the time. Robert overdrew the joint account, and Rachel bailed them out without a word. It wasn't just an archive. It was an arsenal, because deep down, she knew her silence wouldn't last. People like Robert didn't take losing control lightly. And the first shot came just after 9:00 p.m. A Facebook post published from Robert Morgan. "After everything we've done for her, she kicked us to the curb. No warning, no reason. On her birthday, no less. Parents, beware, entitlement runs deep." Rachel read it 3 times. Not because it shocked her, but because it didn't. The comments trickled in. "So sorry, Rob. That's awful kids these days. Ungrateful generation. We raised them too soft." Rachel didn't respond. She didn't delete. She didn't explain. Instead, she opened a new document. At the top, she typed, "For when they ask, Then she began to write. For 5 years, I covered bills. They didn't acknowledge I funded their lives while being called a burden. They chose my birthday to discard me, so I discarded the lie. She stared at the screen, her jaw clenched. Her heartbeat was steady. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, and somewhere far away, a dog barked. Inside, Rachel hit save. The moment Rachel woke up in Erin's guest room, a dull pressure sat behind her eyes. Not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of watching her family turn their silence into slander. Sunlight streamed weakly through the blinds, but it couldn't warm the chill she felt. When she opened her phone, it was everywhere. Her father's post had gone semi-viral, at least by small-town standards. A grainy photo of the Morgan family from a decade ago was pinned at the top. Robert's caption, written like an open wound. We raised her with everything we had, and now she's turned her back on us when we needed her most. Some kids just don't know gratitude anymore. Comments flooded in. Some were strangers offering thoughts and prayers. Others were more cutting. Entitled brat. I always thought she was strange in school. Poor Robert and Linda. They gave her a home, and look how she repays them. Rachel didn't cry. Not anymore. She let the phone slip onto the quilt and stared at the ceiling. Erin came in with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one down gently on the nightstand. It started, huh? Erin asked, voice soft. Rachel nodded. Half the town thinks I abandoned a couple of saints, she muttered. Erin sat beside her on the bed. You going to let them keep telling your story? That question followed her all day, through the polite but pitying glances at the grocery store, through the awkward silence when she bumped into an old co-worker who used to ask her advice on budgeting, through the voicemail from her second cousin Margie, whom she hadn't spoken to in years, scolding her for breaking her parents' hearts. At one point, she received a message from her old high school math teacher. I always hoped you'd find your way, Rachel. I'm sorry it came to this. She wanted to scream. It hadn't come to this. They had brought it here. Erin watched her like a hawk throughout the day, gently nudging her every time she retreated into silence. By sunset, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, the light golden and low, her laptop open in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the touchpad. Then she opened the folder titled Proof. Inside was everything. PDFs of monthly utility bills with her name. Bank statements showing mortgage contributions, screenshots of texts from her mother asking her to pay off another overdue bill. Email receipts from the tire shop, the roof repair, the plumber. She scrolled through them slowly, methodically, as if grounding herself in the truth again, her truth. Erin leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You don't need to humiliate them, she said. But you do need to protect yourself. Rachel nodded. It's not revenge, it's clarity. So she began crafting a post, not with bitterness, not with fury, but with precision. She uploaded images in sequence. The electric bill from last month paid from her account. The Venmo transaction from last Christmas when she covered the furnace repair. A photo of her standing in the rain, fixing shingles on the roof. At the end, she wrote, they didn't lose a daughter. They lost the person who paid the bills. She stared at the words for a long time. Then with a steady hand, she clicked post. The phone vibrated within 5 minutes. She didn't look. She turned it off and placed it face down. Outside, the wind stirred the autumn leaves into spirals across Erin's porch. Inside, Rachel poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window. The war for the truth had begun. And this time, she was telling her own story, Chapter 4, The Curtain Falls. At 3:07 a.m., Rachel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It vibrated across the nightstand in frantic bursts, lighting up the otherwise darkened room. With each incoming notification, she blinked herself awake, still groggy, heart already bracing for what she knew was coming. Voicemail from Mom. The screen read. Rachel hesitated, then tapped play. Rachel, sweetheart, please. Your father hasn't slept. He's not well. Please, I'm begging you, take that post down. What will people think? This isn't you. You're not this cruel. The voice was shaking. Rehearsed, Rachel recognized the guilt-laced cadence. She'd heard it before when Linda wanted her to pay off another late fee. when Robert wanted her to sign off another credit line. This wasn't concern. It was damage control, but it was too late for that. Her post had gone viral in their small town. Comments had poured in, not just from strangers, but from teachers, old neighbors, classmates. I saw her shoveling the driveway during a blizzard when she was 15 alone. They used to brag that she paid the bills. Now they're calling her ungrateful. Rachel scrolled in silence, wrapped in Aaron's throw blanket, her fingers trembling. Not from fear this time, but something deeper. Relief. Validation. By sunrise, the narrative had shifted. Her parents' version of the story, once held up by decades of quiet manipulation and public charm, was crumbling. And in its place, a different picture was forming, one of a girl who had been the backbone of a household that only knew how to take. But just as the support rolled in, so did the backlash. At 9:12 a.m., an email from a local attorney arrived in her inbox. The subject line read, "Cease and desist, defamation and libel notice." Rachel read the body, slowly, lips pressed into a hard line. Her parents were threatening to sue unless she took the post down and issued a public apology. Her breath left her in one long silent exhale. Aaron looked up from the kitchen counter. Bad. They hired a lawyer, Rachel said. They actually did it. You okay? Rachel nodded once. Yeah. For the first time, I think I am. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She opened a new tab and searched for legal aid clinics. Within the hour, she was on a Zoom call with a legal intern from a nonprofit law group based out of St. Louis. She laid everything out, the shared accounts, the years of receipts, the emails requesting help, the text messages of obligation framed as love. The intern listened carefully, occasionally, nodding, taking notes. When Rachel finished, there was a brief silence. "Miss Morgan," the intern finally said, "you don't just have a defense, you may have grounds to file a counterclaim. What they've done emotionally, coercing you into financial servitude, it fits the legal definition of undue influence. You could file a formal complaint." Rachel blinked. "Are you saying I should sue my parents?" "I'm saying you don't have to let them weaponize your silence anymore." That afternoon, she walked into the local precinct with a folder under one arm and her new advocate from the legal clinic at her side. The officer at the front desk led them to a modest, glass-walled room in the back. It smelled of cheap coffee and old paperwork. Rachel sat calmly. Her parents were already seated across the table. Robert wore a pressed shirt and forced neutrality on his face. Linda looked pale eyes, red-rimmed. Neither of them met her gaze. The officer introduced himself, outlined the purpose of the meeting discussion, mediation clarity. Rachel watched as her mother twisted a tissue between her fingers. Her father remained rigid. "We just want our daughter back," Linda said weakly. Rachel's voice was steady. "You didn't lose a daughter. You lost your ATM." Robert bristled. "That's not fair." She leaned forward. "I paid for your electricity. I covered your overdrafts. I put groceries on the table, all while being told I was a burden. Don't talk to me about fair." The officer nodded, motioning for calm. The legal advocate beside Rachel began distributing printed records. "Here is a detailed ledger of payments Miss Morgan made on behalf of her parents over the last 10 years, including but not limited to mortgage, utilities, insurance, and credit card debt." Robert snapped. "We never forced her," Rachel replied. "You didn't have to. Every time I said no, you guilted me. You reminded me you raised me, that I owed you." The officer listened carefully, documenting. After an hour, he turned to Rachel. "We will be forwarding your documents to the legal department for review. In the meantime, if they proceed with a defamation suit, your counterclaim is fully within your rights." Her parents left first. Robert's glare was sharp, but his shoulders slumped. Linda didn't even look up. Rachel stood gathering her papers. She turned to the officer before walking out. "Thank you for giving me space to finally be heard." Outside, the sky was crisp and gray leaves tumbling in the wind like forgotten truths. Aaron was waiting by the curb, coffee in hand. "How did it go?" Rachel exhaled. For the first time in a decade, her lungs felt full. They blinked. She looked down at the folder in her hands, full of cold facts and warm vindication. No more begging, no more proving. Just truth. As they drove away, the town faded behind them. Somewhere her parents were spinning new stories, but it didn't matter anymore. Rachel had finally started writing her own. The legal fight wasn't over, but the emotional one won, and she'd already won Chung 5 Ashes and Afterlight. Miss Rachel Carson, this case is dismissed with prejudice. You're free to go. The sound of the judge's gavel echoed like a bell tolling the end of something ancient and heavy. Rachel stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the words. Not just the end of a court case, but the end of a 30-year cycle of sacrifice, silence, and subtle erasure. She didn't smile. There was no outburst of triumph, just a long breath, steady and clean, like surfacing from water after holding it too long. Outside the courthouse, the autumn light softened the streets of Springfield. Erin waited by the steps, her arms crossed, eyes scanning Rachel's face for any sign of collapse. But there was none. Rachel descended with calm steps, heels tapping rhythmically like punctuation to a silent sentence finally spoken. The community that once whispered behind her back now regarded her with something closer to respect, maybe even remorse. Teachers' neighbors, former co-workers had begun to reach out. Some offered apologies, others simply acknowledged what they had once chosen to ignore. Rachel didn't need validation, but she noticed. She moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in St. Louis, a few hours from the house that no longer held any meaning. It was nothing grand. Exposed brick, a slightly leaky faucet, hardwood floors that creaked in the middle of the night. But it was hers. She took a job as a financial coordinator for a nonprofit that helped women leave toxic households. The irony wasn't lost on her. Now she was the one holding the door open for others. A week after the trial, a letter arrived. Cream envelope, stiff paper. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, but the logo on the corner told her enough. It was from her parents' attorney. The language was polished polite, but the message was clear. They wanted a private meeting, a chance to talk, a chance to reconnect if possible. Rachel stared at the letter for a long time. She didn't feel rage, not even grief. Only a muted ache, like pressing on a bruise that had long since stopped bleeding. Her first instinct was to throw it away. Erin, reading over her shoulder, said simply, "You don't owe them your peace." That night, Rachel didn't sleep. She sat by the window, sipping lukewarm tea, turning the envelope over and over in her hand. By morning, she made a decision. She gathered all the letters, cards, voicemails transcribed into text, every delayed apology and twisted justification. She placed them into a shoebox. No judgment, no rereading, just acknowledgement. Then she drove to the quiet cemetery at the edge of her old hometown. She hadn't visited in years, not since her grandmother passed away. It was a cloudy afternoon, the sky low and heavy. She found her grandmother's grave beneath a crooked willow tree, the headstone weathered but solid. Rachel knelt the box on her lap. She remembered the words her grandmother had once whispered when Rachel was barely 11 and had run to her house in tears after her father screamed that she was ungrateful. Blood is nature. Love is choice. She lit a single match. The papers curled and blackened inside the box. Smoke drifted into the cold air, carrying with it 3 decades of unpaid debt of silence bought with fear of loyalty, traded for neglect. Rachel didn't cry. But when the last ember dimmed, she felt something lift from her spine. Returning home, she found the apartment dim and warm. The little stray cat she had adopted twining around her legs. She fed it, then sat at her desk, a clean notebook waiting. She wrote the title on the first page, "The Price of Quiet Loyalty." Then she began. Sometimes the only way to love yourself is to walk away from the people who taught you not to. Rachel didn't know if she would ever publish the story. That wasn't the point. The telling itself was the liberation. Her voice, once hidden beneath obedience and obligation, now rang clear through the pages. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, soft and certain. The season was changing, and so was she. On her 30th birthday, Rachel was kicked out by her parents, the very people she had quietly supported for years, covering their bills and keeping their home running. There was no thank you, no goodbye, just a packed suitcase and cold words. But instead of begging to stay, Rachel responded with silence and strategy. She withdrew her financial support, revealed the truth when they tried to twist it, and defended herself in court with undeniable evidence. Rachel's story isn't just about heartbreak. It's about reclaiming power. It reminds us that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by respect, trust, and reciprocity. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to walk away, not out of hate, but out of love for yourself. If this story moved you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to follow more stories that honor resilience, truth, and the strength to choose your own peace.